Hi, this is Dina for Splitcoaststampers. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you a neat background effect that you can accomplish using water-soluble pencils, sandpaper, and a little bit of water. The first variation of this technique is done using a plastic stencil. You'll want to use watercolor paper and secure it to the back of the stencil with removable tape. To begin, you'll mist a small area of the panel with water. Then you'll lightly scrape a sharpened water-soluble pencil on sandpaper and allow the dust to fall into the wet area. For this section of the video, I'm using Inktense pencils, but I also tried the technique with 2 brands of watercolor pencils and they worked very well. I want to show you a quick close-up of what I've done so far and also show you how spritzing a little more water on that area will activate those pigments even more. If you want to add more colors to your background, but you want them to stay distinct, you might want to let the area dry a bit before you start adding more pigment to it, just so that area doesn't get too muddy. Once you've finished one area, you can spritz another area and continue adding color until you're satisfied with your background. Here's that first section of background after it's dried. The longer you leave the water standing on your piece, the more those pigments will bleed and blend. If you want to speed up the drying process, you can use a heat gun to do that. I decided to add some green to my background, and here you can see I'm using a Derwent watercolor pencil, and then I'll move on to use an Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencil. Both of those worked very well. At any point when you're working and you find that dust isn't falling like you want it to, there are a few things you can do. Try sharpening your pencil, lightening your pressure, tapping on the sandpaper, or moving to another area of the sandpaper. Sometimes the grit gets filled in, so you're not actually grading the pencil anymore. This is really one of those techniques where anything can happen, and every time the result will be different, and that makes it fun for me. You can play around with different stencils, different pencils, different color combinations, different time lapses. It's really up to you. I'll pull the stencil off and you can see where all that color went under there. Because the plastic stencil grabbed some of the water, I've got a little bit of that to work with. So I'm tipping and tapping and moving that water around to kind of add to my background. And here's my completed project. I turned that background and added some stamping to it. Some random pearls and then a quote and some die-cut flowers. I want to show you a variation of this technique, and this is done very directly on a colored piece. I love using this technique to add texture to backgrounds in certain areas of my watercolor painting. You'll just take a wet brush or a water brush and wet only the area where you want to add some texture. I love this kind of grainy, gravelly texture that this technique produces. Just like in the other variation, the pigment is only going to stick where your piece is wet. So if you have extra dust or pigment that falls, you can just blow it away or wait till your piece dries and brush it away with a soft brush. Here I'm just adding a little bit of blending with the tip of my brush, just very lightly activating those pigments to add a little more color. You can always go back into your wet area and add more dust and pigment, and actually I'm being a little bit messy here on purpose so that you can see how easy it is to remove the extra pigment that falls in the dry areas of your painting. I really love the control of using the wet brush with this technique. If you're working over watercolor or another medium that's water-based, you'll want to make sure that it's completely dry before you add more water to it. Otherwise your color may move or you may end up with water spots that you didn't want. I love how easy it is to activate that color, and notice I'm not brushing the color at all because I don't want to lose that grainy texture. I'm just barely touching the tip of my brush into the water there, and it's just making that color come alive. Here's that completed panel in a sort of vintage masculine thank you card. I really love that gritty texture in the background, and I like to use that technique when I do watercolor paintings just to add interest. Here's another card that I did with a scrap piece that I was practicing on. Didn't make the cut for the video, but I thought it was cool, so I die cut some eggs out of the piece. And another piece that I did with a larger stencil. I love the texture in that background. Hope you'll try this out, and we'll see your projects in the gallery. Thank you so much for watching.